Nice to speak to you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Gibson, and I'm head of Entrepreneurship Education in the Centre for Entrepreneurship. We're based now in the Faculty of Engineering and Technology, but we've got very much a university-wide remit. We want to work right throughout university, and as many of you know, we are already. So this is an exciting development. I'm going to welcome today Dr. Colin Jones from the University of Tasmania. Who I've known and worked with for many years. He's really one of the foremost experts on both on enterprise education, and I will explain what this is, a way of being active and making things happen in every discipline, and also on the pedagogy, which is very important in working within our curriculum. Now, he has not just worked in Tasmania, but he's worked pretty much everywhere. I worked a lot in the UK, right throughout the world, in the States. He's working as one of the key players in working in developing this field, as well as teaching his own classes. And very importantly, he is also not only a practitioner or an excellent teacher, he has a background, but he's also a very eminent in his scholarly works and research in the area on pedagogy and on enterprise education, which gives the word. He believes very much in working on the practice and on the educator reflecting and publishing and taking it out there. So he's a lot of very innovative ideas. He's connected internet, and I'm very, very pleased to have him. He's going to give you his own very unique views and what he's going to do, and obviously we'll get a chance at the end to ask him any more questions. But I do hope one of the results of this may be that we'll be working and collaborating with Colin. We already collaborate together on a number of issues to drive forward with drummers and enhancing the curriculum, enhancing the student experience. So without further ado, I will sit down and pass over to Dr. Colin Jones. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you for those kind words of introduction, David. And I think the key word there is developing. This is a field that's developing. It's not, here's the right way to do it. We're still trying to find ways in which we could communicate. I won't call it best practice because context seems to get in the way and ruin notions of best practice in this particular space all the time, because it is driven in its formation from sort of maverick, weird people. I mean, for those of you who have got to know David by now, you'll know that he's not a normal academic, right? And if you look at, that's all right, David, it's a compliment. If you look at entrepreneurship education where it flourishes globally, you will find mavericks. You'll find people who are doing something, pushing boundaries, not too afraid to sort of maybe upset someone. But the one constant that they have is a genuine locked-in focus on the student. That's where the focus is. The focus is on the student. And what does the student need? What could the student benefit from? So you'll notice in my title that I sent through, quite often I send a title through in advance and then I put another slide up about now, which is I've thought about it and I actually think it's a better title, but I've stuck with this one. I think this one is okay. And I've got this notion of a philosophy of learning. Have anyone ever developed a philosophy of learning? We have philosophies of teaching, but we tend not to talk about philosophies of learning. It's very hard to look through the literature and try and find philosophy of learning. There'll be philosophies, Dewey and other such people, but it doesn't actually come back to the students. What actually is it about the students learning? And then creating invisible educators. So I have 2 classes running at the moment, and I have other classes where I never even meet my students, and I try as hard as I can to make myself redundant in their lives. I don't want them to be dependent upon me, and I think that also is an important part of enterprise education, is that we aren't standing in front of people, that we're over on the side, we can be called upon whenever we be needed. We want our students acting, we want them tripping up, making mistakes, really internalising that learning as they go through them, just as we do in life every day. Yeah. we've given up asking our parents, can we do something? Yeah? We just need to get out of the way and let our students get into that space. So a little bit of housekeeping to start with. Some of you may not be as familiar with the literature and the QAA document, which was put together recently as an excellent piece of work that's been made available outside. It draws a distinction between enterprise education and entrepreneurship education, and I want to quickly let you know where I stand on that. Sometimes people see them as complementary. It's not that I don't see them as being complementary, but I see them as being distinctly related, and I just want to explain that, and it's just so you know when I'm talking for the next few minutes exactly where I'm coming from. So enterprise education, as per the document that was available outside, a process of equipping students or graduates with an enhanced capacity to generate ideas and skills to make them happen. So from my perspective, its purpose is to transform students into individuals with a capacity for self-negotiated action. By self-negotiated action, what I'm saying is if someone wants to do something, they know what to do. Right? They know what to do. They may not know the exact next step, but they'll know where to go to get information to make that next step become a reality. Whereas entrepreneurship education is seen as being equipping students with the additional knowledge, attributes, capabilities required to apply such enterprising abilities in the context of setting up a new venture or business. So I go on to sort of say a nice little quote here from Tobin Hart. I'll make reference to some educational literature as we go through. Tobin Hart says that we are concerned with those moments experienced in great depth that awaken perceptions, develop new abilities, and ultimately render the world differently to our students' eyes. Has anyone come across the work of Tobin Hart? He's got a book called From Information to Transformation. And essentially what he's saying, the whole point of really what he's saying is if you think about a normal semester at a university, we say, well, in week 1, well, let's introduce you to something. In week 2, let's give you an idea. In week 3, let's give you another idea. In week 4, let's give you another idea. And then we get to the end of the semester and we say, now we're going to give you some sort of an exam or test on that body of work, which we think is important for you to know. And his argument would be that most students won't retain they won't transcend those ideas. They'll have them, they'll memorise them to the extent that they need them for an exam and to move forward, but we're not giving them sufficient opportunities to actually internalise that information. So his argument is instead of going from information to information, we want to work out what's most important and go into those central seminal issues and really make sure that they're dealing with something important. So from my perspective, enterprise education is in that little niche. It's saying there are a few things we want you to know, not the whole world, and what it is we want you to know it inside out, backwards, we want you to know it absolutely every possible way. The other distinction I draw by way of analogy between these two things, which seems to work for most people, is I have 3 children, girl 19, boy 13, girl 9, and I love them. I absolutely love them. And they absolutely love me. But we're never going to get married. Yeah? You can have love without marriage. Yeah? You can be enterprising without starting a business. The first and most important thing is to get people to be enterprising. So whether they're doing drama, maritime engineering, or any of the other subject areas that are here in the room, the most important thing is that they're enterprising. That they may subsequently go on and actually want to start some sort of venture around it, that's great. But there has to be a starting point, and the starting point of our focus has to be something that can apply for everyone. It's of a benefit. And hopefully, as we go through this presentation, I'm going to convince you that this is a good starting point. The idea of enterprise education is topically new, but I would argue that it's been around for a long, long time. So Charles Eliot, who was one of the first presidents of Harvard University, wrote a paper back in 1869 in the Atlantic Monthly called The New Education. And he said, to make a good engineer, chemist or architect, the only sure way is to first make, or at least simultaneously, an observant, reflecting and sensible man whose mind is not only well stored, but well trained to see, compare, reason and decide. And when I read that, I think, I think he was actually talking about what we're talking about today in terms of Harvard, and there's a lot of commentary around this, but it's very easy to make the case that Harvard has actually created the educational system that we experience today. It's Harvard who decided that it should be research, that it should be teaching, and it should be this other third thing that he was referring to. And that's where we get a bit stuck today. We've got research and we've got teaching, and there's this other thing we call employability skills, we call graduate skills, we call now enterprise education, and we're still not 100% sure how to tackle it and how to integrate it across back into those other areas of research and teaching. And so hopefully today I'll give you some ideas that might stimulate your thinking in that regard. My own not starting point, but where my work is most tethered is to this guy, Roy Heath. Roy Heath was a psychologist at Princeton University, and he studied a series of graduates over a long period of time. He was trying to work out, well, what is it that actually enables graduates to live a happy and successful life? He called these people reasonable adventurers. So if any of you have read my work, you'll know that I'm always talking about my students and helping them to become reasonable adventurers. So a reasonable adventurer is a graduate capable of creating their own opportunities for satisfaction in life. Personal life, sports life, professional life. Having the ability, and there are 6 attributes, here they are here. Very simply, the ability to question the knowledge that we encounter. So under what context would this idea be true or not be true? The ability to understand how other people view the world to the extent that it might change the way we view the world. The ability to have the confidence to make decisions based on our past experience. The ability to make decisions and cope with in a space where we don't actually know everything we need to know. The ability to have an uncommon interest in a common place. So to be able to take ideas and apply them to our own life, not to some foreign other life, and to have sense of humour. So all of my curricula is built around these 6 attributes. That's what I'm developing in my students. And I know other people around the world who have got something else that's quite similar. And their focus is that. They're trying to build a type of student. And these attributes from my 10 years of using them, my students love it because they know exactly where we're starting and they know where we're trying to aim for. Everything else is just built around those. It's just like how we actually create the context for that to happen. More recently, Tony Wagner, whom some of you may have come across at Harvard, he's come to the view that the world no longer cares how much you know, the world cares about what you can do with what you know. And he argues that all graduates should have these 7 skills, which I believe map pretty nicely back into here anyway. Critical thinking, collaboration, agility and adaptability, entrepreneurialism, effective communication, accessing and analysing information, and curiosity and imagination. So a little confession for you. I should, because you could go off and you could read something and you might think, well, I think this guy's a fake. He's just said something, but he said something over here which seems to be a bit more controversial. So, yes? Sure. So there's a paper I've got coming out in a few weeks' time, and in that I've got a little quote which I'm going to share with you in a minute, something that I've come to believe over the last short period of time, and it has caused a little bit of controversy when I've shared it, so I'm looking forward to sharing it at the conference I'm going to tomorrow down in London and seeing what people think about it. Are you okay with that now? Yep. If anybody wants the slides, by the way, just send me an email. Just get my card off me or give me your card and I can send the slides through to you. That's not a problem at all. So my first confession is that I formed the view a while ago, which I increasingly believe, that it can be seen that enterprise education has a good, close friend in entrepreneurship education, but an even better first cousin in the educational literature. And blood ties matter most. Right? And what I'm saying here is that you can't be in the enterprise education space if you're not in the education space. Because if you're saying that it's about transformational education, then you need to be able to explain how that transformation is occurring. So Chris Binks at Newcastle, which university is that one? Chris Binks? Yeah. He spoke to us last year at our conference and he said, that he loved entrepreneurship education. It just was the magic dust that was being sprinkled across all their degrees, right? And it's very instructive, that type of a comment, because while I suspect it's true, nobody's fully explaining how that transformational process may be happening for this student, not for this one, maybe for that one, and we need to be able to explain that, right? We need to be working with people in education. We need ourselves to be becoming scholars of that educational literature. So not only can we defend ourselves, but we can explain to our students. The students have to understand why we do what we do. Secondly, entrepreneurship is not dependent upon curriculum. It's been with us for thousands of years. It's dependent upon community relations. Therefore, curriculum development must be externally focused. When you mentioned your first challenge that you had in front of you was to try and understand this business community. I reckon that would be the best place to start. If I walked in to your position and I was trying to do something in this space, I'd, well, how does the city work? How does it all pull together?
If you don't get an answer to that, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, you'll have the answer soon, won't you? Yeah, you'll have the answer soon. So. And this is a real challenge for us all, because it's not about creating heroes who are going to go off and pull their sword out and defy all the odds, and live to tell the tale. It's about getting people to actually work with their community, and the community is not just Liverpool. It's Europe, and it's the world, and whatever lays beyond that. This is my current teaching philosophy. I share this with every student. I have several videos that go through this and explain it. I wish for my students the self-determined attainment of entrepreneurial knowledge that leads to entrepreneurial wisdom. The whole purpose of a university, wisdom. I want my students to discover themselves in the lives they live. I want my students to be excited about learning and fearless of failing in the same breath. I want my students to be able to create opportunities for satisfaction within and after their university studies through a process of self-negotiated action. So that's it. I give that to every student. I say that's what we're on about. If you're in my class, if you're accepting that you're going to take on the responsibility of being in this process, then that's what we're actually trying to do. And we're going to have those conversations about that. And more often than not, they love it. And quite often they'll say to me, what do you mean by that? And I'll say, well, that's the whole point of university. How many universities used to have a little logo before they got all corporatised that had someone holding the little light, yeah? Which is the whole point of the university system, the handing down of the light of knowledge from one generation to the next generation. And the wisdom is just merely the application of the knowledge. So people used to already have the knowledge before they came to university. They worked in someone's pharmacy. They came to university to be able to fully develop that wisdom. Now we most probably have too many students leaving universities that have developed some knowledge but not the wisdom and really know how to apply it. We haven't given them enough time because we gave them too much knowledge. So these are the questions that I'm going to play with you with today. First one, are we collectively committing education crimes by creating an uneducated class? Are we trapped in a pedagogical Groundhog Day, seeing everything the same the second, the third and the fourth time over? Do we need enterprise educators? If so, when and how do we need them? And fourth, through which access do we or should we organise enterprise learning? What matters beyond what matters? So let's have a look at the first question first. This notion of an uneducated class was talked about by Ruskin. Many of you might know of Ruskin. He was an artist, he was also a philosopher, celebrated at the University of Sheffield. And he argued that an education of a man and a woman, obviously, but in those days, 100 years ago, just talked about men. He argued that the education of a person could be reduced to three questions. First, does that person know where he is? Second, does he know where they want to go? And third, do they know what they should do best under those circumstances? And to the extent that an individual could answer these three questions, they were educated, and to the extent that they couldn't, they're still uneducated. We think about being uneducated as someone didn't go to university. Oh, so you didn't get an education, right? You must be uneducated, right? And yet there are lots of people who didn't go to university who are very capable of knowing where they are, where they want to go, and what they have to do in order to get there. But many of our students and many of us, if we were challenged to actually want to change direction or try to move ahead, we would have to be defined as uneducated. Because we're still where we're actually at, even though we've got a sense of where we are. So thinking about how we organise a curriculum about being able to create this self-negotiated action is a really important thing, because that's where the confidence comes from. That's where the student actually starts to see the opportunities. Rather than creating fake opportunities, those opportunities just become natural as they start to work out where they are and where they want to go. Should we be worried about this possibility that we're actually party to this crime of creating this uneducated class of people who know something but don't actually know how to use it or how to actually move forward? Well, UNESCO is saying that roughly 50% of all work by 2020 is going to be performed by freelancers. This is pretty scary stuff. How many of you guys are educating your students for the world of freelancing? 1, 2, David, yours doesn't count. 3. So that's good. Okay, that's much really better than what I would normally get when I'm talking to an audience. It's quite interesting, isn't it? If you're teaching someone architecture, they don't just need to know how to draw the lines and do the work. They actually need to know how to survive and navigate that world of work. Because they're now going to be competing against everybody in a whole range of countries where the labour costs are so much cheaper. And this is happening in all industries. So it's not enough to give people a degree in architecture. We actually have to help them to understand how would you make a living being an architect, given that the world has changed so much. Now, there are 3 things that have changed massively that impact all of our students' future work lives and our own. One is the democratisation of the tools of production. So technology and the internet is making it so easy for us to do things that we couldn't have done before. If I wanted to have a business where I actually captured people's need to actually sleep somewhere, only 20 years ago I'd have to have built a hotel. I'd have to spend thousands and thousands of millions of dollars to actually do that. If I wanted to actually help get people around the streets of Liverpool in a better way than the current system, I'd have to create my own taxi fleet. Now the internet makes it much, much easier for these types of things to come in and actually change the way we do things. So we've got massive reductions in costs in terms of how we go about producing things, and we've got a massive increase in the potential returns that we can gain from these things. Secondly, we've got the democratisation of distribution. So this morning, after I'd run through my slides and made sure I thought they were okay, I did a podcast. I have a podcast show, and I made the podcast. I uploaded it onto my computer, and then tomorrow morning, I suspect it'll be time for the weekly podcast to go out, and I can reach the world. At the moment, around 1,200 people listen to the podcast, and most of them are in America, and it costs me nothing to reach them. Technically, might be on my time, and it took me half an hour to sit down and reflect on the last week, and that's all I ever really do is just reflect on what's happened to me in the last week as it relates to the reasonable adventurer, being able to create your own opportunities for satisfaction. And I can use all of these types of tools and now Twitter and other things. It's costing me nothing to be able to reach the whole world with what I'm wanting to do. And lastly, there's new markets are being created every day. So it'd be easy to think, oh yeah, we run a university in Liverpool. So we've got lots of students who come to us from Liverpool. We've got some people who come to us from internationally, and we've got other people that come to us from other parts of the UK. But, you know, you'd have to be naive not to think that within 5 years' time, the educational products that Liverpool and every other university we're putting in the market will be radically different to what we've got now. We've already got MOOCs that are out there being experimented with and played with and trying to work out how to actually make them work for us and students and the like. But creating a degree that's about something very, very specific that you never had the numbers for in Liverpool, right? Ancient Greek, right? Maybe you say, we're not going to run the ancient Greek class because there's just not enough numbers here for it. All of a sudden, you're now running the ancient Greek course for the whole world. So rather than actually trying to satisfy a geographical area, we're now trying to a particular type of end user. And that's increasingly happening in all industries. And clearly higher education is not going to be immune to every other force that's changed all the other information-based areas. So, uneducated or educated. The challenge we've got with the internet is that it's changing so rapidly. It does make it hard for us to actually understand. We're lucky if we've got kids who can explain certain things to us. So we're lucky if we're curious. We're lucky if we've got time to be able to keep up with these things. However, these are problems that have been with us since time immemorial. Penrose wrote that the services that the resources will yield depend upon the capacities of the men using them. But the development of the capacities of the men is partly shaped by the resources that men deal with. Veblen also said that the physical properties of the materials accessible to man are constants. It's the human agent that changes. His insight and appreciation of what those things can be used for is what develops. And when we think about our students, it's not the changing technology that should be our focus. It's the changing minds of our students and their ability to be confident to navigate that world regardless of what changes keep coming. I thought that was quite a good little cartoon when I saw it recently. I thought it sort of captures this sort of, you know, we've got kids, it's like they're all doing something and we're just sort of trying to keep up with them. So we're all faced with this opportunity, you here, me in Australia, to aid the learning of a bunch of kids who are radically different. They are radically different. We already know that now. They're not who we were, and we can't educate them the same as the way we think education is appropriate. They are different. What we know from David Price, and if you haven't read this book, it's really worth a read. You can pick it up on Amazon for nothing these days. But he talks about these 6 different characteristics of learners, the people that we're working with right now. They want to do it themselves. They want to do it now. So if you're telling them that they've got to wait to week 11 before they're going to get the thing that they're actually interested in, they're not going to wait to week 11. They're already going to get on Google, Wikipedia. They'll find it themselves. They're happy to do it with their friends. It doesn't need to be just between you, them, and the textbook. They're actually happy to get out there and work with their friends. They're happy to help other people. They're happy, they want to have fun doing it, and they're more than happy for the whole world to see it, right? That's the space that they live in, right? So we can't keep educating these people. We're going to bore them to death if we keep giving them old-style ways that we think have stood the test of time. Let's move on to the second question. Are we trapped in a pedagogical Groundhog Day? Well, here's what I think is a really big challenge for us. Educators and students view the world constrained both by the material reality of that world and the paradigm blinkers that they've adopted. We, as humans, we do not inherit a sensory ecological ability. We actually have to develop it, right? These pictures maybe not be as clear as they could be. This is a flock of starlings. Does anyone, I'm sure you guys have seen the starlings, yeah? Thousands come together, flying about an inch and a half apart, no leader, and they never hit. They never hit. How is that so? Spiders, you can knock down the spider web. That's a spider, sorry, it's a bit funny. You can knock the spider's web down as many times as you want, whether it's rain or something else going through there, whatever. It'll just keep building that spider web up. The ants will just follow that pheromone trail, right? There's no spider school, there's no ant school, there's no starling school, right? These guys just inherit a set of local rules in their DNA that just means that when something moves next to them, they move. And they just do it. They don't ask why, they just do it. And when they all do it together, it just means that they can all create those amazing scenes in the skies. So these guys have a survival advantage. By the very process of their birth, they're actually given a set of sensing skills, abilities, that enable them to actually interact with their environment in a way which hopefully will benefit their survival. We don't. Our world's changing. It's changing rapidly, and we don't naturally have this sensory set of skills. We actually have to help our students to understand what's happening around them. And that's where enterprise education, I believe, has a great role to play. Because whether they're doing marine science, drama, architecture, it doesn't actually matter what they're doing. Enterprise education has got a role in helping students to understand what does your world look like, what opportunities exist in it for you, how might you actually become more educated about actually taking action in that space? But we've got, this is my pet problem, I've written some papers about this, we've got this Gogi paradox. Everybody wants to put everything that relates to education in this box. The lid never goes on, right? Anything that relates to education gets thrown in this box, right? Called pedagogy. And I think this is wrong. I think this is terribly wrong. Because not everything that relates to education should go in this box, but it does, right? Try to find something in the education journals that doesn't relate to pedagogical approaches, something alternative to pedagogical approaches. It all just goes into the one box, which means that we just keep going round and round in circles because we actually haven't got all these ideas organised in the way we think about them. So an alternative way, which I've been championing, I certainly didn't create, but I've been championing the work, and you'll see their references shortly, is to actually think about this notion of heutagogy. So heutagogy is self-determined learning. So it's when someone says to you, there's something that I want to do, there's something that I want to know. It's when someone actually starts the learning process for themselves, rather than being told, week one, we will start at this point. So we've got pedagogy, what the educator wants to initiate, and we've got heutagogy, what the student wants to initiate. So when we're talking about student projects and opportunities for students to interact with the community, rather than saying, here's your project, maybe we're simply just saying, so what would you like to do? Go away with your group mates and have a chat and come back and tell us what you would like to do. What's in your heart? If you weren't with me now, what would you like to be doing? Is my favourite question to my students. You know, if you weren't sitting here having a conversation with me, what would you most like to be doing? I had a Malaysian student a few years ago. He said, I'm quite confused by this assignment. And I said, well, he said, I haven't got any clue what's in my heart, what I would want to do. And I said, well, if you weren't here with me, what would you most want to do? And he said, play indoor soccer. I said, well, then go and do that. So he ran a tournament for 150 students at UTAS, an indoor World Cup, and he came back and he brought me his videos of it and everything. It was a great success. And he said, as soon as I started telling people what I wanted to do, they all started saying, how can I help you? And so the learning that he got from this was that if you don't tell people what you want to do, no one can help you. You know, if you're prepared for people to laugh at you or to ridicule you, which they're not going to, but if you can get over those hurdles, you never know who might actually want to help you. And in the middle of this, we then have this responsibility area. Given that I've got something that I feel I can contribute, and given that you've got something that you want to do, how are we going to agree on this? How are we going to agree what your role is and what my role is, what time frames you're going to keep to? Do you know when you need to call on me? Do I know what I need to make available to you, perhaps online? So we all know where we're all going. I'll come back to that as we get on through the end. So do we need these enterprise educators? Because this is a funny country. I've been coming to the conference I'm going to tomorrow since 2005, so it's nearly 10 years. And enterprise education in this country is like a yo-yo. One government comes in and says, oh yeah, we need enterprise champions. There's some money for that. And then I come back 2 years later, they've all gone. Oh, the money ran out, the funding ran out. And that just seems to go on and on and on, which is really sad because there's a lot of talented people who had put their heart into this and then lose their way. In Australia, we don't have any of this. So there's no initiatives around enterprise education at all. You just have educators like myself, in a university who are doing something. So there's continuity, but there's not any huge resources that get put underneath it. So, spot the entrepreneurship educator. This is my favourite picture. I actually own these shoes, not those ones, but ones that are exactly the same brand. And that's how I want to be for my students. I want to be invisible. They know I'm there. They can see my shadow, right? But I want them to make the running. I don't want anyone to be walking in dependent upon me, but they can be as dependent upon me as they need to be. But that won't be the starting point. We want them to be able to create this self-determined learning, and we want them to actually have to work their way through solving these issues. In Finland, I did some work in Finland earlier in the year, and I thought this was, you might not be able to read this very clearly, I'll read it out for you. So Finland, as you know, has a very good reputation for education. Although I met with the Director General of Education in Finland, and he just thought this hilarious. He said every day someone walks in here and wants to know how we're so good at education. People always want to know why, and he says there's no secret. He said, if anything, we're not that good at education. And if you actually look at the changes they've just made to their education system in the last 3 months, they've turned the whole thing on the head. No subject areas. They've got rid of every subject area in Finland now. Yeah? So it's all events. So they just study events now. But when they study the global financial crisis, there's finance in there and there's other things in there. Very interesting how they've turned it on the head. But what the guy said to me there was the difference between Finland and most other people who are trying to get up the PISA tables is that the difference between our best school and our worst school is not very much. But in your country, most probably the difference between your best school, which is the same as our best school, and your worst school is most probably huge. And that just drags you down the table. But in terms of good practice, you're just as likely to find good practice in England as you are in Finland. It's just that it's not consistent across the whole system. Anyway, it says here in this little, this is an educational development centre in Finland, what is entrepreneurship education? And I reckon this is a cracker. This is for primary school kids. This is for 8-year-olds. It says entrepreneurship education has compiled a list of helpful questions for assessing whether teaching constitutes entrepreneurship education. Please answer the following. Who takes responsibility for the activity? Who generates the idea? Who plans the activity? Who selects our ideas to be implemented? Who strives to reach the goal? Who gains the experience? Who takes the risk? Who practices collaboration skills? Who rehearses performances? Who practices presenting and justifying his or her arguments? Who takes care of the network? If the answer to most of these questions is the learner, then the activity is entrepreneurship education. And I reckon that's a pretty neat way to sort of capture it. It doesn't have to have anything to do with business. In fact, I strip business away from all of my stuff in the first instance, and we just get people to be enterprising, and if business needs to come back in, then it needs to come back in. But it's not an assumed partner at the beginning. Remember what I said? There's a relationship between the two, but it's not as strong as the relationship to education with enterprise. Hopefully you can read these okay. So what does it actually look like if we're using this heutagogical approach to education? Well, the educator, their primary role goes more from a designer to a coach and a mentor. For the resources, we look from being more of a supplier to a facilitator. For permissions, we go from being assumed to requested. For the student, they go from listening to dreaming and doing. The resources go from they're the receiver to the identifier. They've actually got to get out and make the running. From permissions, from requested to negotiated. I want students to actually come in and negotiate with the university. From the institution, they go from being the custodian to the sponsor. For resources, from controlling to accepting. Permissions, from absolute to case by case. Some flexibility. And for the community, they go from being passive to active engagement. For resources, they go from receiving our graduates to actually contributing. And for permissions, from excluded, not part of that process, to actually included in that process. That's just my take on what this might mean in my world. Our last question, through which axis should we organise enterprise learning? Well, I've always had a soft spot for this saying. I think it's, if you want to do something really cool anywhere, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. But essentially, the guiding principles, and this is the Hazen Kenyon quote with the heutagogical learning, learning when the learner is ready. Learning requires more than knowledge and skills, it requires new connections. Learning doesn't depend upon the teacher, it can be triggered by experience. You know, students can learn on the weekend. They could learn on Saturday. Learning is focused upon the student, not the curriculum. Self-sufficiency in learning, personal exploration is risk-taking. The ability to change one way of thinking and acting from learning, application of learning, making connections beyond the theory, positive learning values so that learning is fun. When I read through their list, I thought, actually, I don't need to change anything that they have there because that, to me, all fits. You know, I think that actually all makes perfect sense in an enterprise learning sense. Who's familiar with constructive alignment as an idea? Yeah, okay. So constructive alignment just merely says that we think we've got the curriculum in pretty good shape if we've been able to work out what would be the things most that the student needs to learn. So we get the learning outcomes sorted. We say, okay, that's really the most important thing that these students have to have. Given we've worked out what the learning outcomes are, what learning activities would best support the ability of students to get these outcomes? And then what types of assessment would we then use to ensure that that learning has occurred? So we say there's this constructive alignment when this process goes through. Now, this is an idea, actually a Tasmanian who actually came up with this idea. So, but he lived most of his academic life over here in the UK, John Biggs. And it was interesting, I met him a couple of years ago at a book launch, and I said to him, it's a big idea, John, you know. Did you put a lot of time and effort in it? He said, no. That was like a 30-second thought. He was just trying to find a couple of words to capture his ideas, and then he moved on to the next thing. But it was just one of those things that sort of caught on and sort of got stuck. But I think when we're talking about enterprise education, we've got this notion of constructive alignment. I think we need to go beyond that. I think we can talk about responsibility alignment. So now, the agreement between the learner, the educator and other stakeholder vis-a-vis who needs to do what to support the learner. And then we can also have resource alignment. That is, the supported learner identifying the type of resource profile, and that's social capital, human capital, financial capital, ability to access resources, not money, required to ensure their venturing can proceed with anticipated success. Taken together, these three focus areas support the processes of Heutagogy. I think I might have skipped over that in the previous one. I know there's a lot of Gojis in here, isn't there? And everyone thinks I'm just making all this stuff up. So let me just quickly explain, and then hopefully I can convince you of this. Heutagogy is scholarly leading. It's the highest level of mastery of education that educators could perform. It's where you are here able to do something pedagogically. You have resources, you have knowledge, and you have a student on the other side who actually has that capacity for their own self-determined learning, to actually create their own starting point. So do I step back and let them make the running? Maybe they are not able to create the running. Maybe I have to prep them a bit. Maybe I have to actually put a little seed in that little space to actually help them move forward. Whatever's actually happening there at the beginning point, my ability to move across and actually help the learner to get moving, or to move out of the way, and then at some point to negotiate andragogically in this self-directed sense in the middle, that's Heutagogy. It's just the flow between Heutagogy, pedagogy and andragogy that enables this process to be as most driven by the student as it can be. Obviously it can't always be driven by the student. And we don't need enterprise education to be a dominant thing in every area of education. It might be something that's happening more around the edges. But when we do want people to act in that space, we do want them to be actually holding the steering wheel, not sort of sitting in the back seat. For me, it looks a bit like this, although the bottom line gets a bit confusing. But there is a relationship that exists between entrepreneurship and enterprise education. We don't need to get caught up in semantics too much. But at the beginning, we want people to be learning about entrepreneurship, theories, and about themselves. We want them, as they move forward, to be able to participate, and this time frame could be 2 days, it could be a semester, it could be over a degree, but we want them to be reflecting on their ability to do things in an enterprising way, as well as participating in problem solving. But ultimately, we want them to be able to come out being able to do two different things. One, we want them to have the capacity to acquire the resources to act enterprisingly, and therefore to have the capacity for self-negotiated action. That whole process is just Heutagogy. It's just that scholarly leading as we work them through that process. So, a couple of slides to finish on. I think there's a real challenge for universities in terms of their positioning. Everybody wants to be good at this. Everybody wants to be known for their research excellence. Everyone wants to get up that table. And people want this too. People want to be seen as being a great teaching institution. And there seems to be a conflict that occurs between these things from time to time. The better you are at this, the more sometimes people think you might not be as good as that. And the more better you are at this, people might think it's at the expense of this. I think what we can put in the middle there is learning excellence. Because the thing that unites these two things is actually learning. You can't be good at research if you're not good at learning. And you can't be good at teaching if you're not good at learning. And I think that learning is about helping to be able to make that claim that we've actually got graduates capable of self-negotiated action. Whether it's going off and doing something in a research sphere as a PhD student, or whether it's actually going into the field and taking that knowledge, or whether it's just going about living their life. Whatever that actually may be, I would love to work for a university that says, we're all about this. I remember years ago going to Salford University, and they flagged it, they flew up, the flagpole was, we're the enterprising university. Did anyone see that positioning that they had? It didn't really say anything about their teaching, and it didn't really say anything about their research. So it sort of looked good until it sort of just sank. Because there was nothing, it was like, it wasn't built on anything. You can be something here, but it has to be obviously supported by the things that are never going to go away in a university sense. It's the very essence of what we started that slide, you know, what Eliot talked about at Harvard. You know, those three pillars of the university, but it's rather than giving too much emphasis to this at the expense of this, we can actually position ourselves more around this, I believe, which is a natural place for enterprise education because it's something that can sweep across all faculties and all schools, but not at the expense of this and not at the expense of this, because it directly relates to the scholarship of teaching that you have over here, and it directly relates to the ability of your researchers to be doing the things that they do, which are hopefully world class. So in conclusion, Clark Kerr, who had a lot to do with the reorganisation of higher education in America, I'm going to paraphrase him here a little bit. Enterprise education is at a hinge of history. While connected to its past, it's capable of swinging in another direction. And personally, I believe that we must ensure that that purpose is to transform students into individuals with that capacity for self-negotiated action. Alfred Whitehead, who's one of my heroes and certainly has guided my thinking in this space a lot with his book, 1929 book, The Aims of Education and Other Essays. If you haven't read it, send me an email and I'll send you the first 2 chapters and you can work out whether you want to read the rest of the book. But he said, in training a child to activity or thought, above all things we must be aware of what I will call inert ideas. That is to say, ideas that are merely received into the mind without being utilised or tested or thrown into new combination. Every intellectual revolution which has ever stirred humanity into greatness has been a passionate protest against inert ideas. So can you imagine all your students outside protesting that you filled them up with all these inert ideas, that you gave them something they didn't actually need? Can you imagine that? They're all out there on the street, right? Or would it be nicer to imagine that they're actually saying, thank you for letting us know how we can move into the world of work by using freelancing processes, Kickstarter, being on iTunes, being on Amazon, wherever it might be, they're all free. There's not one cost to pay to participate in that world. It's all free, right? And it's the world that our students need to go into, and it connects to everything that we want to teach our students. I was talking to David yesterday about Liverpool, and we were down at New Brighton, and it was very nice and a lovely evening. And I was talking about the challenges you have up here of unemployment, of, you know, what do the locals do? Do they have to move away to get a job? What sort of jobs are here? And it's no different to anywhere else in the world. This is a part of where I live. This is the east coast of Tasmania, and I went up there recently, and I asked a whole bunch of kids, 8 to 10-year-old kids, what do you want to be? What's your occupation going to be? And they all wrote down something very positive. Even the guy who wanted to be a hunter, you know, he was pretty keen about being a hunter. But everyone else had what you would call pretty mainstream. I want to be a doctor, I want to be a pilot, I want to be, you know, all these, they're normal dreams that you would expect, even though they live in this amazing place. And the next question I asked them was, where will you do that? 90% of these kids said they would do it on the East Coast. Now, they don't obviously at this stage know about the limitations of job opportunities and the like, right? So what's the difference between your students and my students? Living in a pretty cool place might not give them the job opportunities that they would like. If you look down at your feet, if you keep looking down here and saying, well, that's Liverpool, well, it's going to stay like that, just like it will for these kids. If they say, well, I'm on Tribunna in Tasmania, it's going to look like that. What about if you get them to look up in the sky? Up in the sky, you've got the stuff that's just flying around everywhere, right? You've got people writing stuff, sending stuff. There are so many opportunities for our students to learn to be in that digital economy that if Liverpool's where they want to be, well, then they should be able to be in Liverpool. And they can engage with the rest of the world doing the things that they want to do. But it's much easier for them to do it understanding how that world of work exists. Not the world of Liverpool work, but the world of work and where those connections actually are. So you can stay in touch with me, because I always enjoy people staying in touch with me. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also find my podcast show, The Reasonable Adventurer, which is easy to find. And happy to take some questions.